Greetings, sisters and brothers, friends, patrons, and comrades. Welcome to episode number 40. Yes, it's number 40 of African History Club, and I am your host, Milton Alimadi. We've come quite a long way in our engagement and interaction and learning and teaching about Africa. As always, I thank all of you for the support. I thank all the recent members, the recent patrons that have also signed on. And as always, also remind you, if you think anyone else would be interested in engaging with African History Club, please do let them know. So today I had intended to interview a Zimbabwean journalist based in Harare over the African Union and the crisis the African Union is facing. But I would like to postpone that to another episode. I want to revisit and expand on episode number 20. Yes, that was on December the 15th when we discussed the conflict in Ethiopia. And I want to discuss that because it has implications for other African countries as well, implications that are not so good. So I'm very concerned with the escalating conflict and the development and the risk that it may pose to other African countries that also face similar dynamics in terms of forces that are now included in a federation, but when you have some parts of the country that think maybe they're better off not being a part of the federation. So that issue is also faced by other African countries, such as Nigeria, for example. So that's why I think it's very critical to revisit that discussion. So that is why I will devote today's podcast discussing and also providing an update. But also wanted to make a few points before I get into it. I was able to attend the memorial service for our dear, beloved, departed friend, Michael Brooks, in Amherst on August the 13th. It was good to celebrate the memory of our friend and comrade, but it was also a sad occasion because that same week, the Monday of that week, his father also passed away, Glenn, who was himself looking forward to that celebration of his son. Life is too strange sometimes. So we ended up being there to mourn Michael's father, whom I did not know. I hadn't met, but I got to meet, of course, his friends who were there and the people that are also Michael's friends and his sister, Lisha's friend. And she was there, of course, as well, as was her mother as well. And even though it was sort of like there for a misfortune, but also a celebration, it ended up being a really empowering evening, actually. Because people that interacted, engaged, and knew Michael well were able to share some stories about their interactions and their friendship with Michael. It certainly was empowering for me. It was also, difficult. I didn't think it would be that difficult. When I got up to speak, I could barely speak initially, but then I managed to, really get it out. And what struck me the most was when I was heading to Amherst, I kept thinking, why was it that I always enjoyed the interviews that I did with Michael tremendously? What was different between that and the many, many other interviews I've done through the years? And then it struck me and I realized what the reason was. Michael paid attention. He really did. Because some people, when they're interviewing you, they have a number of set questions, and they insist on asking those questions. But Michael, by paying attention, he would allow the conversation to go wherever it should go based on the interaction. So it was flexible, very dynamic, and that's why our conversations were always very engaging, and I enjoyed them tremendously. And of course, I miss Michael. I miss my sister, who also passed away last year. And whenever I'm doing something that I sometimes question myself, am I doing it the right way? I ask myself, how would Michael do this? Or how would my sister Barbara do this? And then I say, you know what? I'm going to do it in such a way that both of them would be really impressed. So I use that as my motivation. Okay, so that was the first point I wanted to make. A second point is I've heard some very good feedback from people that have had a chance to read my book, Manufacturing Hate: How Africa Was Demonized in Western Media. I've heard from people who are overseas, and it's not easy for them to get a copy because it's very expensive, apparently, for the mailing if you order it directly from the publisher. And it's just crazy because these publishers want to make profit, and yet they don't know how to make profit by making the mailing fee so exorbitant, multiple times much more expensive than the book itself. It's just preposterous. But for people that are overseas, obviously I would encourage you to order the e-version instead of the book, which you can order from the website of the publisher that I will post at the end of this podcast. And as I indicated previously, at some point I will get back and do a couple of more podcasts discussing the book itself and the contents. It's just that we've been diverted the last few episodes because of more breaking news that are a little more pressing. So that is the second point I wanted to make. And then the third point also relates to the book. Some colleagues of mine in New York are going to be hosting a virtual book talk on September the 30th, and they will have some discussants, people that are either historians or engaged in writing about Africa, and they would be engaged in a conversation with me about the book and about generally Western depictions of Africa historically. So that's September the 30th, and once I have the details and the flyer, of course, I'll make everybody know about that, because obviously I want all my patrons and supporters to attend that virtual book talk. So now let me get back to today's episode. And, when I did episode number 20, when I closed that episode, I reflected on why I was very concerned with the conflict in Ethiopia. And I will read from the ending of that episode number 20, and then you'll really see what I meant. Because there was sort of a celebration at very early. The conflict started November the 4th, and then within a short time it seemed that the forces in the Tigray region had been defeated by the federal government. But I was concerned. I did not see that as a cause for celebration, and I insisted that there can only be a political solution. We cannot resolve political issues by war. We just can't. Whether it's in Ethiopia or any African country, we can't have war. The ordinary people don't deserve that, because as it is, they're already living under very trying and challenging circumstances. So war is the last thing that they need. Often you find that the elite that rule African countries are the ones that are much more ready to try to resolve things with the gun, because they don't suffer personally the consequences. Well, not initially anyway. So anyway, let me read what I said at the end of that episode, and then I'll pick up from that point. This is what I said, verbatim, I'm quoting. It's at the 25 minutes and 10 seconds mark. If somebody wanted to go back to episode number 20 of December the 15th. I said, so even though Abiy Ahmed and the military, the National Army, have managed to conquer the physical Tigray region, nobody expects that will be the end of the conflict, because Tigray has a history of military insurgency, of effectively fighting insurgency. So unless there is a political solution, it seems to me that this is something that could escalate into a long-time conflict. And if that were the case, most definitely, it might encourage the other regions that comprise Ethiopia to also take the same approach that Tigray has taken. So really, at the end of the day, there's no military solution to this conflict. So I think Abiy Ahmed, the Prime Minister, should find a way to step back and come to the conclusion that rather, than trying to destroy the TPLF, he still has to reach an accommodation with them, because the other regions are watching carefully as well. The other regions that comprise Ethiopia. So depending on how Abiy Ahmed resolves the situation with Tigray, that is also going to affect his ability and his country's ability to hold together the entire Federal Republic of Ethiopia together. So that was in December. I must admit that never did I foresee the possibility that things would change so dramatically and so quickly. When I said long-term conflict, I was thinking maybe over several years, but that the tide might be reversed. And then in June, of course, the dramatic news came that in fact the tide had been reversed, and that the Tigray Defense Forces had recaptured the capital of the region, which is called Mekelle. And this is where things really began to get me very concerned, because now the conflict has spread to other parts of the country. So the Tigray forces have now entered into the Amhara region. So the conflict has now spread there. The Tigray forces have entered into the Afar region. So the conflict has now spread there as well. So you can see where this is going. This could really threaten the viability of that entire country. So that is the concern I voiced in the December 15th podcast, and that is the concern that I repeat today. Because now you also have the Aroma region. The Oromo and the Amhara are the largest ethnic population in the Federation, which is comprised of 10 regions. So now you have Oromo forces now saying they've reached an alliance with the Tigray forces to fight against the federal government. So you see how dangerous the situation is now. And of course, the people that suffer are the ordinary people, the ordinary Ethiopian people who want nothing to do with war. They're the ones that suffer the consequences. And that is why this is a very dangerous situation. And then you have other African countries like Nigeria, where you have the forces pulling away from the Federation. There are others in the south or in the west who believe that they're being marginalized by the government, whose senior officials, including the military leaders, come from the northern part of the country. So you know that people in those parts are also watching what is unfolding in Ethiopia. And then you have in Cameroon, where you have the former region that had been initially colonized by France. And then you have the part that had been originally colonized by England. And then at the end of the colonial era, they were both combined into one country. But the English-speaking part of Cameroon say they're also discriminated against and marginalized by the French-speaking country, which has had a dictator that's been running the country for more than 4 decades now, Paul Biya. And there's a very violent civil conflict occurring in Cameroon as well. So you know all of those countries are watching what is unfolding also in Ethiopia, a very important country in Africa, a country where just before the conflict erupted was one of the good and hopeful signs that you could point to in Africa, that this is a country that is moving forward and setting examples for other African countries. So this is why this conflict, to me personally, is very painful on many levels, because the only people that benefit by African countries breaking up into these small entities, these balkanized African entities, are of course the imperialist powers, because it's much more easy to exploit tiny, powerless African countries. You can extract resources either for free without paying taxes or royalties, or at dirt cheap rates. And that has been the challenge for Africa, how to get fair prices for their commodities. And as Kwame Nkrumah said, the only way is through a United States of Africa to come together and use the power of a unified continental government to increase the bargaining power of the entire continent in terms of its relation with the industrialized countries. So long as they remain these small entities, that will never change. And of course, now you know things would get worse if many of these African countries started breaking up into more smaller entities with even less power. Now, in terms of the outside influences, terms to try to end this conflict in Ethiopia, the African Union has, quite frankly, been very embarrassing. But it's not surprising, because the African Union is not really independent of its Western supporters. I don't know what the current figures are, but as of a few years ago, 60% of the budget of the African Union was financed by the outside world, by the EU, by Britain, by Canada, United States, and other countries. I think China is also a contributor. So the point is, if you have an African Union that is not financed by the African countries that actually make the membership, that is a challenge. That's one challenge. The second challenge is the African Union is also made up of some leaders of questionable authority, questionable standings themselves, and legitimacy in their own countries. And that, of course, also compromises their ability to take a decisive stand when you see a situation such as the one in Ethiopia, when you see a situation such as the one in Cameroon. The Cameroon conflict keeps getting worse, and the African Union has been completely missing in action in that conflict as well. So the challenges are tremendous. And that is why it is very important to continue putting pressure on all the sides involved in the conflict in Ethiopia. and that they come to their senses and all pull back. It's not really worth it to break up this important African country. The repercussions will spill throughout Africa. Many other African countries will suffer the consequences. There must not be a breakup of Ethiopia. But of course, at the end of the day, the people themselves determine what direction they want to go. And if they decide that the federation is not fulfilling their needs, as tragic as that may be, it's going to be very difficult to stop that from materializing. And the same thing, of course, in Cameroon. And this is not to say that there are not legitimate issues. There are many legitimate issues. So, for example, if you look at Cameroon, if you look at the violence against the English-speaking people and region in Cameroon, then there's no doubt that they have a legitimate say when they say they need to break from Cameroon. But on the other hand, is there a better way? Can we put pressure on the Paul Biya dictatorship, for example, and force him out of power? This corrupt dictator that's been running Cameroon more than 40 years now, stole billions of dollars, and yet supported by France. In fact, he doesn't even live most of the time in Cameroon. He lives in a luxury hotel in Zurich and Switzerland, and now and then flies back to Cameroon just to show himself before he leaves the country again. We cannot have African countries run that way. So my own position, personally, would be for Pan-Africans to put enough pressure on countries like France and make sure that the support of a useless leader like Paul Biya comes to an end, so that the English-speaking people of Cameroon and the French-speaking people from Cameroon can come together and resolve their conflict. But so long as we have a corrupt dictator like Paul Biya just using the national treasury to enrich themselves, we will not be able to resolve that conflict. So this is why I wanted to really revisit episode number 20. I think it has tremendous impact on all of Africa. I would like to see a united and peaceful Ethiopia. I would like to see the conflict in Cameroon resolved, the conflict in Nigeria resolved, and the conflict in many other African countries. Because really, without a United States of Africa, the African continent will continue to be exploited of its resources by in the industrialized world. And the people that pay the ultimate price are the ordinary impoverished Africans, the citizens of African countries. Now, I would like to also add one other note. In terms of the conflict in Ethiopia, it's inflicted tremendous damage to the healthcare infrastructure. So I recently interviewed an Ethiopian doctor who is also a professor at the Medical University of South Carolina. And we discussed some of the destruction of the healthcare system. And as I mentioned in episode number 20, it's so sad that in this conflict, the targets were not even primarily military targets, but civilians. And in this case, hospitals as well were targeted. So we discussed a survey by Doctors Without Borders that surveyed 40 hospitals. And out of the 40 hospitals, they found that only 5 were operational. And then the doctor whom I interviewed, his name is Dr. Mulugeta Gebreg Ziaba. So he's from Ethiopia and from the Tigray region as well. Excuse me. And as I said, he teaches in the University of South Carolina, the medical school. He also did a survey because they also had hundreds of health clinics. He did a survey, and his survey showed that 80% of these facilities are no longer operational. So you can imagine, when you have a condition of war, when you have people displaced from the land, they're not growing food, when you have a blockade that is still continuing of the Tigray region, and now the UN has come out and said there's impending famine, you see how the destruction of the healthcare facilities can really compound this already very dire situation. So Dr. Mulugeta and some of his colleagues at the university have been conducting a fundraising program under the umbrella of Tigray Can't Wait. And they have a website, and I would like people who are interested to visit that website and to consider supporting if they are satisfied with the information on that website. And that website is E as in Eric, D as in David, and then hyphen, and then R as in Richard, E as in Edward, A as in Apple, P as in Paul, .org. So it's ed-reap.org. So that is, there's additional information on that website about the dire situation, and then about the plans that they're trying to undertake to provide some relief, and also to see how they can move toward rehabilitating some of those health facilities that have been destroyed. So I think this brings an end to episode number 40. As I indicated, I will try to get back to the interview with the Zimbabwean journalist to discuss the challenges of the African Union. I will also get back to discussing my book, Manufacturing Hate. And as I indicated, I will also post the link to the publisher's website for people that want to order either the book or the ebook itself. And I will let you know once we have the flyer completed for the book talk of September the 30th. So thank you for all your support, and I will see you soon. Stay Pan-African, stay strong, stay healthy. See you soon. Bye-bye.